So we're learning the Kuntris Chinuch Vadracha, the essay of education, and we're on page 67. Kitzer, the Kitzer before we go to chapter 13. Ha'ada muvdo mibruye mata umayla. What he taught us yesterday is that man is separate, is distinct from all heavenly creatures and lower creatures. Umikoi mashavai, and his place of residence, irktana g'dayla, be it a small city or a large city, mashpia impacts al kol anfei achayim, on all aspects of his life. That was the third precondition for the educator to take into consideration. And now he goes on to the fourth, Yud Gimel, Tanai Revi, the fourth condition. Yedias hamechanech es hanov hameguna v'hakbalosam. The educator must know that he must know and understand what's desirable and repugnant and their limits. Let's see how he develops this idea. There are three fundamental and primary foundations in education. In the relationship from the educated and the guided to the educator and the guide. Aleph. Rum erkoi shel hamechanich v'hamadrich be'enei hamechunech v'hamudrich. The educated, the student, needs to come to a place and be brought to a place where he understands the great, the exalted stature of the teacher, of the educator, of the mashpia. If the student Yaini thinks his mashpia is a pinch hitter, meaning to say not the real thing, a fill-in, we have a problem. I recall when I was in yeshiva, I think in 8th grade, and our Rebbe was Nebuch sitting shiva, so they had a person who was a substitute, and for whatever reason, we didn't really respect him like we respected our teacher. It was totally wrong because he was older than our teacher and many other things. But for some reason, there was, foolishness that we as boys were. 1 second, Yedison. We as boys were heard, and we carried it over to him. So automatically, we didn't really learn well from him. Yes, Yonison, what did you want to say?
Yeah, when I was teaching in the public school for a couple of months, then I was a substitute. It was terrible. They would kill me, the kids.
A substitute has the hardest job. But right, but here, I'm using that as an example. For, even if you're not a substitute, if the student doesn't value, then we have the teacher. It's a big problem. I always say this, and people are quick to criticize a teacher, a mashpia, a guide, a rabbi, right? Because after all, he's supposed to know everything and do everything. One of the fundamental issues why that criticism exists is because the congregant, the student, the employee, whatever the situation is, hasn't gained the knowledge of respect for the guide and mashpia and teacher, and if they're worthy of that. Of course, if they're not worthy of that, then they're right in not respecting them on that level. But here we're not talking about that. We're talking about a teacher, a mashpia, a madrich, who is worthy, but somehow he failed to develop the student in a way that the student should come to that recognition. And that's an art. It's an art. You have some teachers who come into a classroom and they're buddy with the students. It's a big it's a big problem. You have some teachers who are totally removed in their own world. It's also a big problem. The balance between kiruv on one hand and richuk, closeness and distance, is so important for the success in creating the right student in the sense of respect. So that's the first point. Let's go to point number 2.
Basically, you're saying boundaries.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Basically, you're saying is the boundaries. Boundaries between the Rebbe and the student.
Yes.
To make boundaries.
Yes, boundaries.
Right. You're my Rebbe.
Right, that's what I was saying. But what the Rebbe is saying is that there needs to be rum erkoi. The student must feel the exaltedness of his teacher and mechanech and mashpia. Number 2, Beis ha'imun. The students trust asher ha'mechunech v'hamudrich reichesh el ha'mechanech v'hamadrich. In English, he just says it, a pupil's trust in his educator and counselor. So first we speak about respect, exaltedness, and here we speak about imun, trust. If you don't trust them and you feel they're misleading you or they have their own agenda, it's a very big problem. And number 3, Mashmas, this is the pupil's complete obedience, compliance. So we have exalted, trust, and compliance, complete compliance. And they go hand in hand. In other words, you're not going to have complete compliance if you feel your mechanech, your educator, is not at the level that he should be at. So there's a breakdown. And these 3 things are, remember, the Rebbe is saying this and writing this for those mashpiyim, those 2 in Lubavitch, and he's telling this to us, to the teachers and guides. If you want to accomplish that your student should have respect for you and honor for you, and which will ultimately give him a feeling of respect and everything else, and it'll be healthy, you need to be that way and to create that in the student. Clear? These 3 fundamental aspects of education, next page, 69. In relationship to the educated, to the student, Aleph, close examination. So the question is, how do we create it? Okay, so that's what he says now. So the Rebbe is now saying, before we were talking about what the student needs to have towards the teacher. Now the Rebbe is saying, how do we create that? So he says, you teacher need to do the following 3 things. Aleph, ha'istaklus ha'chazoka, the close examination, b'mohus ha'mechunech v'amudrach, to the very essence and core of the educated one, b'nigilusay matzavay, by knowing his habits, matzavay situation, Mekai Megurai Usviva, his place of residence and his environment. In other words, all the things that we mentioned until now, you educator need to think about and prepare yourself for and assess properly the student, and then you'll be able to succeed in getting the student to reciprocate and have respect for you. Base 2. There needs to be love, yachas, association of love between the educator and the educated. In other words, if you display this, but you do it with coldness or as they say, a fachmuret face. Fachmuret means like a sad face. It's hard for the student to feel closeness to you. My father always spoke about two mashpim, great mashpim in Chabad that he knew. Reb Nissen Nemanov, who was in France, in Brunois, and Reb Shlomo Chaim Kesselman, who was in Lud. Both came from Russia, and both were Bala Mesiras Nefesh, and both were born in, well, actually, one was in Lubavitch, one was not in Lubavitch, but came, later. Anyway, both great men, great Hasidim. My father said that Reb Shlomo Chaim, the way he brought him into Lubavitch and turned him into a fine student was with kiruf, with love. He would put his hand around him and he would call him by his first name, but not the regular first name, an adjective, I don't say an adjective, like Yankale. Instead of Yaakov, he would say Yankale. That Yankale, I don't know, idiom, in English, that Yankale makes all the difference in the world. You could say Reb Yaakov Spiel, and then you could say Reb Yankele Spiel. The difference between the two is night and day. Because the Yaakov Spiel is Yaakov Spiel, fine, he's a good person, everything's fine. There's nothing special about the relationship through that way of addressing a person. When you say Yankale, it makes all the difference. So Reb Shlomo Chaim would call him by his name, but not his regular name with that Yankale, And the other mashpia was more distant. Didn't smile much, was more rigid, and a great, great person. And, but both created tremendous, great Talmidim, and both had their styles. But here, the Rebbe is saying, it's interesting, how will the teachers and mashpiyim who are more of the cold type, how will they relate to what Rebbe says here? Yechusei ava v'chiba. So I want to say, just to answer those people, not leave them behind. They also had ava, but their ava was more in a revered way. And it came out, for example, this mashpia, his nephew just passed on at age 98 or 99. I interviewed him several years ago, and he told me that once there was an issue with accepting a relative of theirs in the yeshiva because he didn't have a good report as far as behavior and his conduct and all that. And the Rebbe Nissen told the nephew, he said to him, they don't understand that this is our blood. And here you're talking about someone who was very disciplined. So what I picked up from this story is that as much as he was gevura and disciplined, he had within himself a very great feeling of ava, of love and mercy. It's just that the way he expressed it outwardly was in a disciplined way. So I would say that's the reconciliation between someone who has no compassion and no mercy and no love versus someone who does, but it's buried inside and it's channeled and very much guided in a certain way. And then there's the other extreme, which he talks about here, Yechusei ha'ava v'chiba, the warm relationship to the educated, to the student. And I say that also because, like Yoni just said before, I said it, he said, if you get too chatty and buddy with the student, you lost it. So Yechusei Ava doesn't mean you should turn yourself in like you're one of the guys, okay? I believe when Rabbi Grossman went into those discos to schlep out the chevre from the, for the discos in Nachlat Shiva in Yerushalayim and in other places where he went, he came in there with his beard and payas and his long frock and his hat up, that just looking at him, you shivered. So here he is. On one hand, he appears to be this, distant individual, and at the same time, he's talking with you and engaging you. So it's a combination, okay? But anyway, let's go on to the third point. Hayizbonenus mesuna shel hamechanech v'hamadrich. The educator has to have deliberate reflection. B'gidulei hamusari shel hamechuneh v'hamudrich mizman lezman. From time to time, he must think about the student's moral maturity. In other words, he needs to reassess from time to time, where is my student at? But he's talking now about not his level of learning. I'm talking about Musari, his ethical and moral behavior. So basically, this is a value. I could tell you that the years when the administration of the Lubavitch Yeshiva went into the Rebbe, this was a great part of discussion and conversation. Was the ethical and moral stance of the student. Yes, everyone, they wanted everyone to learn and get good marks and excel and get smicha and this or that. But more importantly is this idea of musari, the musari, the word musar, the ethics, the morals, and the teacher has to look at the word misuna. You understand? Misuna means patience. You can't get this accomplished if you're in a rush and if you're not taking time to evaluate every individual student. So he says that's the third required point that the educator must have to succeed with creating a student that feels the teacher is exalted, trusts the teacher, and follows the teacher. In our world, we call this a dugma chaya. What's the best way is being a living example. When your child, when your son, your daughter, your friend sees the way you act in such a way, and it's really a refined way, it makes a big impact. I still contend that that's not enough. Because, especially today, we're sometimes very thick-headed, and chutzpah is rampant. I mean, although the Gemara in Saita says already at that time there was chutzpah yazge, right? There was much chutzpah. Today, you have people who are really exalted and refined, and others laugh at them and ridicule them and poo-poo them, right? So there are times when a person has to make themselves clear. The Rebbe, by the way, explained once why the Rambam, in his introduction to Yad HaChazaka, basically says, Moshe ad Moshe lekom k'Moshe. From Moshe Rabbeinu until Moshe ben Maimon the Rambam, lekom k'Moshe. No one rose as great. Right? Now that seems to be the epitome of arrogance. I remember the Rebbe said that the reason the Rambam wrote that and said that was he had to, because he lived at a time when people were scoffing at Moshe Rabbeinu and at the Rambam. And, it's like saying, hey, since when are you an opinion sayer on Torah? You're a physician to the Sultan. You're a doctor. You're this and you're that. You're also a rabbi and you're also a scholar. And come on. So the Rambam had to be emphatic in making clear what his book is about. Not about himself. About what the Sefer is about. So that people will take a look at the Sefer. And if they take a look at the Sefer and they study the book, they'll see who the author is and what type of person he is. Let's continue. The educator must know very well what's considered beautiful in character and what's considered repugnant. What's considered beautiful is not absolutely the same for all men, all people, all humans. Therefore, the educator must judge very carefully, besichle, with his mind, al kol davar v'davar befrat, every specific thing, before he tells the student, do this or don't do that, because it'll either make you refined or coarse, he needs to assess that. What is it that he's going to instruct? Or what is it, right? And is it fitting, and will it make this particular student better through it or worse through it? Because again, here, let's say you talk about generosity, and the mechanech, the educator, gives a lecture and talks about what if one student feels bad, he doesn't have the means to be generous. He feels very, very bad. So is generosity a good midah? Absolutely. But you have to be so careful, because if one of those students, if you do it as a group, and one of those students, it doesn't have the means and feels very bad, I'm not saying that he shouldn't give a shir on it. A shir lecture is one thing. But when it comes to saying, go and do this and this, and if you don't do this, you're not fulfilling what the Torah says, and you're being kaptz, and you're being stingy, and you're not being kind to mitzvah tzedakah, and things like that, you have to be very careful. So in other words, here you have what's called a midah no. You have a good attribute, a good behavior, but nevertheless, in this particular case, it has to be catered to that particular student. That's what he says over here. Okay? And the same also, there are certain not nice character traits, and guess what? Sometimes for a certain student and personality, based on where he or she comes from, it's very, very good. Okay? It's very good. For example, the idea of not talking much and being more reflective, right? So for one student, this is gewaldic, and for another, it's a disaster. Come out of your shell. You've been too long in your shell. You need to go out. You need to meet people. You need to smile more. And another person smiling the whole time, talking the whole time, and is wasting their life. That person needs to reduce their talking and draying around. So you see how depends on the situation, depends on the person. After the teacher, he says, after the teacher assesses the particular issue, be it proper or ugly, he's assessed it according to the needs of the particular student, he says it to him mitoich avav chiba, from a perspective of love, b'deya v'haskel, with intelligence, b'divrei chachamim, b'nachas lishmoyim. Words of the wise are heard with calmness. Davar zeh no, he says, this is something very good for you to do. Utzrichem la'soisoi, v'davar zeh meguna, and this is repugnant and no good. Utzrichem la'archikoi, and stay far away. So the manner of delivery, the tone of voice, the body movement, everything makes a difference in the way it's received by the student. You could say the same thing. Two people could say the same thing. And one has one result on the recipient, on the listener, and the other one has another result. One a good one, one a bad one. Why? Because one met the criteria mentioned here, and one didn't meet the criteria mentioned here. The more he knows, the more the educator knows and understands well what is considered proper and beautiful, what's considered repugnant and ugly. And the more he puts effort and diligence into fulfilling the three aforementioned conditions, in his relationship to the student, more and more will his words be received, and his instructions by the student. The student will follow more of what he shares with him. And not only will he listen and follow because he has what we call Mashmas. Mashmas is another word for Kabbalah Soil, acceptance, obedience. Not only because of that, but also because the student sees in his teacher that he's sheikel kol davar v'davar b'mishpat, that he weighs carefully everything iyuni b'mishpat iyuni, with a deep intellectual processing and a thoughtfulness. Beinoi levein atzmai. I know from the time when I was in Bet Shemesh and I had conversations with Moshe, and they involved some community matters, I remember he usually would say, let me think about it. And I didn't feel he was putting me off. He was doing what it says right here in the Kuntris. B'mishpat iyuni. You want to really think about it quietly and thoughtfully and see the pros and cons, and then come back to the table and voice them, share them, discuss them. At the end, you will have to give an answer. Because if the person, be it a student or a friend or a congregant, asks you something and you beat around the bush, they know you beat around the bush at the end of the day. And they lose respect. But if they see that you weighed it and you came to a determination, whether it's to the person's liking or not, they still respect you because they see you thought about it and your line of reasoning. The Rebbe says the same thing here, that the student will follow what the teacher says, what the guide says, what the mashpia says, when the student realizes the mechanech was, look at these words, very important, sheikel, kol davar v'davar b'mishpat iyuni. He weighs each and everything with an intellectual processing. Okay? I know that at times I have a difficulty with this, and that's why I've learned to fulfill the dictum, sleep over it. We tend to rush to a decision or a feeling because we might be that way ourselves. And even if we aren't that way, we feel that we have to give an answer right now. The truth is, the mishpati yuni is the best way. I know one of Rabbi Malo Shalom was one of the Chabad Rabbanim in Crown Heights, the big Talmud Chacham. He was a Rebbe of mine too. When you would ask, and he knew, they say he knew, and it's probably true, he knew like word for word, or almost, of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. He was a big Talmud Chacham. When you would ask him a shaila, he wouldn't answer right away. He would say, let me look it up. Now, it's understood that if it's Erev Shabbos and you don't know if the chont is kosher or not, or is it cooked or not, and what's the halachas, and the Rav needs to give you an answer right away. That there's no time. It's coming Shabbos and that's it. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about when there is time, there should be the mishpat iyuni, and when the student sees that the teacher weighed the pros and cons of the issue about him or her, that itself gives him, says, my teacher took the time to think about me. That creates a bond of love right there. And this, you see, so what the Rebbe is doing in this country is fascinating. He's putting the onus on the guide, the mashpia, the teacher, the parent, and the employer. He's saying, pretty much, that if there are issues with the student, the child, the employee, it's not their issue, it's the educator's issue and the parent's issue. I'm making a general statement because here it is. The teacher says, listen, this is not a good behavior. This is a good behavior, right? Now, if that's true, Yonason, what do you need to have? Thank you. Shikuli Yuni. What do you need to have? Thoughtfulness and intellectual processing. Well, why? It's good or bad? No. Good or bad, don't do it. And especially today, no one is interested in listening to good or bad. What they're interested in listening is to discussion, dialogue. And the more they see that we, the parents and teachers and guides, have given it thought, they respect that. And you can get much better results and long-lasting results. That's what we need. We have a new phenomenon, and I want to finish this and we'll not get into it. A phenomenon where people, and we spoke about this over and over the last 3-4 years of our learning together. Dropouts, but not dropouts, youth. People who are married 20, 30 years dropping out. What is happening over here? And I'm not talking about just dropping out of Yiddishkeit and Frumkeit, dropping out of society, a depression, a stagnation, where it's like, what? I've been doing this so long. What? And the answer, one of the issues, stale. Moshe and I discussed it. This idea of being stale. That you need to constantly reassess. When you constantly reassess, not whether you should put tefillin on or not, no, but the meaning of tefillin and the purpose of tefillin and the how of tefillin and the why of tefillin and the beauty of tefillin, then you're in a process. You're in the middle of something. When does one become stagnant and all that? When they feel they've done it, they've completed, and now what? Next? But if you realize you didn't begin, or you're in the middle, then you have a job. The Rebbe is saying here, this idea of shekel, kol prat uprat b'mishpat iyuni, is so important for the development of the student to come to a point where he respects the teacher and the parent and all that. And this is an answer. This is an answer to one of our issues today in the larger community. If we did this regularly, I'm telling you, you'd see a great change. You'd see a great change because the boy or girl or the employee, whatever, they see, my teacher's thinking about me and really thinking about me. Wow, I love him. I love her, that's special. That's what people are missing. They're missing the feeling that the superiors don't care about them. And that's what they need to see. And the question is, do we really care about them? Do we really care about them or not? We could say we care about them, but not thinking about them means you don't care about them. Thinking about them means you care about them. Let me just conclude. And even if the student doesn't know the reason why my teacher is spending so much time thinking about me, it's pretty, clear. This is nice and this is ugly. Nevertheless, it causes the faith of the mechanech v'hamadrich, of the student to the teacher, and he'll carry out the instructions punctuously, exactly. It's interesting, he says, and although the student may not understand the reasoning. In other words, many times the student says, I don't understand why this is important to do. But the fact that the student sees you're thinking about them overrides, I don't understand, and he will do it. You see? Listen, think about that. And it's so true. So I think we could summarize and conclude that the Rebbe's main point in this chapter is the yachas chiyuvi, the ava v'chiba, the overall relationship between the teacher to the student with love. What do I mean with love? With care. The student has to sense care and concern. And when he will, and in order to do that, the Rebbe says you have to evaluate properly. Any points? Anything you want to say, Chevra? Yes, Yonason. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say that it seems to be like this is an ideal situation. That it's too ideal.
Why is it too ideal? Why?
Because the expectation is really high. The Rebbe is expecting us to be angels.
Why? Wait. Why? Why do you say that? Let me hear. Why?
Why? Because he's expecting us to do too many things. I'm not a teacher now. I'm not a parent. I don't have children in the house. But I got people that I'm meeting every day, and I see the way they act, and I see what they do, and I'm with them every day. So I'm trying to have an effect on them.
You can or cannot? You can or cannot?
I'm trying.
Okay. Okay, good.
I see, but now I see that the Rebbe is demanding that I do a little more than just be a friend and try to help. I should really put myself into it.
That's right. That's right. And he's telling you, think about the people that you meet and what do they need, and how am I going to, exactly. So this is not being an angel. This is giving us great hashpah. This is a real mashpia. What we learn now, that's, you always talk about, you have a mashpia. We just learned what a mashpia needs to do. So you're acting as a mashpia, you want to have an impact on them. He's giving you tools for success, not to be an angel. The Rebbe is not telling you, Yonason, that if you don't do this, you're not a good person. He's not telling you that. He's telling you, if you want to be a mashpia and you want to have success, these are guidelines. That's it.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
I understand where you're coming from and what you're saying. It's like 1 and 2 and 3 and detail, But you have to sit back and really think about some of the ideas, and they're so homey. They're just a matter of taking the time. Like I told you with Moshe, it wasn't this is before he learned the kuntris. When he said, "Let me think about it. Let me mull it over." And okay, he's in a position of being a communal person, and as far as all that, so it's absolutely necessary. But it's true for a parent. You say you don't have kids, you have grandkids. and you talk to them on the phone, on the Skype. It's never ending. This is ideas that are relevant to us as people and as Yidden. Chevra, listen. Yes, Moshe.
I just want to make one slight comment, and that is that Rebbe Dalman, I think what you said here at the end today is so critical. The relationship, but especially that people know that someone is thinking about them, someone who's like a quote-unquote superior. Right now, I don't know if the rest of the Chevra is so aware of this, but for some reason in our community here, and I don't think it's not limited to our community, but unfortunately there seems to be a phenomenon which is very disturbing of young married couples who are getting divorced.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like that in New York and different communities, but here in Ramat Beit Shemesh, for some reason, and not just Ramat Beit Shemesh, this is an issue that is becoming within the last 5 years. So my wife has been asking me, like, well, why is this? And one of the things that seems to come about is that all the situations are very different, but it seems like the one common denominator is that the couples did not necessarily have someone to speak to about things. They didn't have someone maybe who was, I don't know, either looking out for them or they felt was like a quote unquote superior.
Right.
However we're going to define that. So I'm just bringing that up because I think that this is this point is such a critical.
Right. I hear you loud and clear, and you're 100% right. They basically didn't have a mashpia. Call it a mashpia, call it a counselor, call it whatever, And, I'd love to talk more, but I have another shir now, so I have to end. Anyway, listen, everyone, have a great Shabbos. Yes, what?
Good Shabbos. No, we're meeting shears at
Monday through Thursday. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a great Shabbos. Only good things. Psudas Toivos. Bye-bye.